What are the most common plyo drill routine mistakes? That's what we're gonna be diving into in this video. Stick around to the end of the video because some of these might be costing you 1, 2, even 3 to 5+ miles an hour on your fastball if you're making some of these extremely common mistakes in your drill work. But first, if you're new around here, my name is Ben Brewster, co-founder of Tread Athletics. Our mission here with this channel and with our company is to provide the information and resources to help pitchers reach their athletic potential. If that sounds like something you're interested in, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Let's dive in. So the first issue is probably the most common, and it has to do with one of two things, but essentially this is getting the angles wrong. So really two ways this can manifest. The first is actually just standing too close to the net. So releasing too close to the net. And if we think about it, typically, let's just say we're lined up in the center of the rubber. Our release side, for me as a lefty, it's gonna be about 2 feet, give or take, to the arm side of the rubber, right? To the arm side of where that starting point is. And so we extrapolate that over 6 feet, that ball is gonna start off about 2 feet arm side. And by the time it actually gets to the target, right, let's say it's middle. And so when you get too close to the plyo wall, it actually screws up the angles. As an example here, if I'm gonna line myself up with the center of this quote unquote plyo wall, this plyo net right here, and I just release through like a normal, let's say 3/4 arm slot, that ball is still gonna end up about 18 inches arm side of the center of the plyo net. The closer I am to the net or to the wall when I release it, the further out that's gonna be. The further back I get, it kind of softens the angles just a little bit. And so it's less extreme of a difference. And so the issue is when you're too close to the plyo wall, a lot of times what happens, guys will kind of cheat or push their elbow to the center of that plyo wall. And this is also extremely common with narrow plyo walls. So imagine if this area of this net was about half the width. A lot of people will make these like wooden portable plyo walls, and they'll make them about 4 feet wide because that's just a nice, easy, kind of convenient way to do it. The issue is if I line up in the center of a narrow plyo wall, I line up, I throw, I release. Well, I'm not just gonna miss the plyo wall, right? I'm not just gonna throw it off the plyo wall. I'm gonna find a way to throw it to the center of the plyo wall. And so what happens? What happens is guys end up pushing, cheating, climbing the elbow to get the ball to the center of that plyo wall. So the issue with the narrow plyo walls is that what happens is, as opposed to just releasing through your natural arm slot, letting the arm slot in plane and coming out 18 to 24 inches arm side and just hitting the wall where it would naturally hit it so that we don't miss the wall, what ends up happening is guys end up cheating their arm, hiking their arm, or maybe they don't cheat the arm slot, but they end up holding onto the ball longer, and releasing the ball, over rotating to get the ball to the center of the plyo wall. So either way that becomes an issue, because when they go to catch play, what they'll notice over those first 10, 15, 20 throws is that they're cutting the ball. And so this creates some compensations in our actual delivery by, instead of allowing the arm to just slide in plane, allow the torso to lead the way, and the arm to just wind up where it would naturally wind up, throwing 60 feet, you have guys end up cheating the arm forward to be able to get it to the center of that plyo wall. The solution here is, one, don't have these narrow plyo walls. If you're gonna have a 4 foot wide plyo wall, stack 2 of them next to each other so you have a nice 8 foot target to throw through, so you don't have to worry about exactly where you need to release the ball. The other aspect is some people will say, well, let's just take this narrow plyo wall and offset it arm side. And so you'll see on this particular net, we have kind of an arm side target up here for certain guys, and this can get moved around. And so they'll offset the narrow plyo wall arm side and say, well, just line up here to empty space and put the wall over here in line with where our natural arm slot would be. That is one potential solution. The issue is that a lot of guys have trouble actually just throwing to empty space and directing their rotation through empty space, knowing that the target's actually over here. And so what you'll see is a lot of these athletes, I like to describe it as like a quarterback throwing like an arm side pass. They'll kind of just guide the ball over to get it to that spot, as opposed to actually directing their rotation through a central target. And so if you can actually keep that rotation, keep that direction rotation, rotating through a central target and just allow the arm to naturally unfold, then that'll work for you. But a lot of guys end up just kind of cheating off arm side, and it ends up creating other issues as well down the chain. So not a big fan of that. If you have a narrow plyo wall, it's all you have to work with. You can back up pretty far. So one option here is to back up. I'm still maybe 10, 12 feet from the net here. You can back up 20, 25 feet. And again, it'll soften the angles. So it's not as extreme of an angle to the wall. It softens the angle the further back that you go. If you're still noticing continual issues with compensating, cheating or yanking the arm up, or cutting the ball the first 10, 20 throws in catch play, there's no reason you have to do plyo throws up close to a wall or net. You can do the exact same drill work constraints with hard leather baseballs and do those in catch play to a partner from 45 to 60 feet away. So instead of a 7-ounce plyo, use a 7-ounce leather baseball. Instead of a 1-pound plyo, use a 9 or 10 ounce leather baseball. And that can be a really helpful thing for guys that just really struggle with the angles component of their plow drill work. Another one of the more common issues that we'll see is when guys go too heavy with different ball weights in their plyo work. And for me, I rarely see anybody throw a 2-pound ball without some sort of compensation, but certainly from a 4-pound ball standpoint, almost never ever seen this done without some sort of climbing, pushing, or muscling up or tensing up from the arm. I think the only example I've seen where somebody was throwing a 4-pound plus ball without any sort of guarding or compensation was actually an Olympic javelin thrower doing some of these types of throws in his preparation. You know, as a guy who benched 400 plus pounds and is, you know, one of the top guys in the world. So what's most likely happening if you're gonna throw a 4-pound ball is instead of that arm being able to relax and whip out and around in plane into ball release, and again, I'm a lower stock guy, so I'm demoing it here, but even for guys that have more trunk tilt, you still want the ability for that arm to relax into layback, whip around in that helical path, into elbow extension, into ball release, into pronation. So what happens when the ball's too heavy is the body doesn't trust that. The body doesn't trust that layback, and so it tenses up. And so the arm ends up pushing or limiting layback or becoming a more tricep-driven acceleration arc. So what happens is guys end up essentially, I'm exaggerating, but they end up throwing the elbow. It becomes a tricep-driven acceleration rather than pulling from the pec and the lat, pulling from behind the body. It becomes a push in front of the body. And so it changes the way that that acceleration arc is behaving. The tricep begins to get sore. Now the bicep becomes the main decelerator. It has a more aggressive path to handle deceleration because now it's just tricep bicep. It's not this nice smooth pulling from behind the body as the torso goes, pec and lat pull, arm unwinds, unfurls gradually, pronates, and then you have a nice gradual deceleration arc. So going too heavy, certainly a big issue. For younger kids, even like the 2-pound ball is probably a no-no, and even the 1-pound ball in a lot of cases, you'll see some of that guarding, tensing, and you have to lighten it up. So as we'll talk about in a little bit, adding a little bit of extra weight can be very helpful, but if you start going too far, you start to see compensations, muscling up, guarding, tensing, that's when you've gone too heavy. Reel back the weight a little bit. The other common issue we'll see, and this is particularly relevant as you get in season or as you get deeper into an off-season on-ramp, is only doing your plyo and your drill work on flat ground. And the reason being, if you have a mound setup, and you'll see that most of our plyo areas, our plyo kind of stations in our facility have mounds here. If a guy wants to throw on flat ground, we can flip the mound up and do it on flat ground. But in general, once you've been on-ramp to the mound, once you're already throwing bullpens, it just provides additional repetitions and ability to work on feeling a downhill slope. We already do so much of our throwing, our catch play, our long toss, those types of things on flat ground. There are some subtle biomechanical differences. A big thing, obviously, with the slope is that when that front foot touches down versus when that front side has to begin to open up, totally different on the mound. And this becomes very apparent when you're working with higher leverage guys, higher level guys, and you compare their flat ground mechanics to their mound mechanics. And you'll see just some very wonky things on flat ground. They might be perfectly timed up, synced up, hips clearing, front foot down, torso back. On the mound, they get on flat ground, and now what's happening? That front foot essentially lands earlier. So by the time the front foot's landing on flat ground, they might still be uphill. They might not have cleared the hips. You get them on the mound, and they're in a perfect position. They're on time, they're able to get downhill. And so because there are these subtle differences, it can really help to have those daily touch points on the mound. And the other component that's really helpful is beginning to incorporate the mound in an on-ramp. Maybe they're not even ready to throw bullpens yet, but you can start incorporating mound plyos into the routine. So that 2-3 weeks before they actually begin throwing bullpens, you've started to incorporate some mound reps. It makes that transition to bullpens, to short boxes, to live ABs, that much smoother of a process. So mound plyos can be a huge game changer, especially in season. If you don't have that set up, it's really worth trying to figure out how to get a portable mound out there and incorporate that into your normal kind of free throwing setup. Another common issue, and this doesn't really have to do with any one particular thing, but it's not customizing the different drills to your own body, your own preferences, your own anatomy, your own delivery. And so what typically happens is a coach will demonstrate a drill or a sequence of drills to the entire team. Hey, we're gonna do pivot picks, we're gonna do rocker throws, we're gonna do roll-ins. And the way that it's demoed to the entire team is the exact same. And so everyone sees that one demo, they line up and they're like, okay, well, this is a rocker throw, I'm gonna do the exact same thing as everybody else. And really how we should be addressing it is, how does your body move on the mound? What type of thrower are you? Are you a guy where we need to actually play with that back foot position? We need to play with the amount of hinge. We need to play with the torso posture. We need to play with where the hands are broken. We need to play with, hey, do we need you to be a little bit more smooth and fluid, longer arm path, or a little bit shorter arm path? And so what you should do is take all these subtle details, stance width, foot position, how much coil, how much clear, torso posture. You're trying to customize the different drills to your delivery so that it can transfer as well as possible. The whole point of all this drill work is to ultimately transfer it to the mound, to games, improve the efficiency so that you can have more sustainable velocity, stay healthy, throw more strikes. And so if you're just doing what everyone else is doing and you have no actual purpose behind what you're doing, you're not going to be getting as much out of it as you possibly could. And in some cases, you might actually be getting worse. So simple example would be something like a lasso throw, right? In a lot of cases, players don't even know what they're doing on a lasso throw. They just see somebody put their arm up here, turn and fire, right? You're not really getting much out of it. One simple example here would be for some of the guys we work with who have a lot of hip internal rotation, they have a lot of range of motion. We might play with turning the back foot in 10, 15 degrees to be able to wind up a little bit more tension for those guys. For some guys, we might play with more of a hip loaded weight shift into landing. And other guys, we might actually turn them all the way in, kind of isolate from there and just rotate from the start. So there's a bunch of micro variations that you can work into any drill, and that's really where you start to see a lot of the benefits come out. It's not just like everybody do a 10 toes throw the exact same way. It's like, well, some guys might need to be here, clear the hips, more directional. Other guys might need to get a little bit wider, kind of block off the lower half. Other guys might need to start with a pendulum arm swing to help them flip up a little bit earlier. Other guys might need to do more of a figure eight. Other guys might need to do a little bit heavier ball weight. And so being able to customize it and understand the why behind it becomes a huge differentiator versus just doing the exact same thing as everybody else. The next mistake that we see is only addressing your drill work from a backwards chaining standpoint. And so if you've never heard this terminology, backwards chaining is simply the idea that we would start our drill work at the end of the sequence, the end of the kinetic chain. So arm action drills, upper half drills, and then you might work in some lower half drills, some rocker throws, and now you're gonna work in something with the lower half, and now you're gonna work in walking wind-ups or full delivery, adding in the leg lift. Starting from the end of the throw, and then working your way back to the start of the throw. That would be backwards chaining. This can certainly have its place, especially for athletes who have some sort of arm action issue. They struggle to kind of turn the arm on, to sink the arm in playing with the shoulders. They struggle with some aspect of the acceleration of the arm, whether it's pushing the arm, climbing the elbow, low elbow at landing, not getting the front side closed, arm up on time before they begin to accelerate. Things that happen at the end of the throw can often be addressed really, really well with a backwards chaining approach. The problem comes when there's some sort of issue that happens as the very first move at the very start of the throw, which screws up the entire kinematic sequence from the start. So a good example would be somebody who from the very start of their delivery, they kind of stall at a balance point, tip the hips way uphill, and then begin to fall. Well, no amount of arm action drills at the end of the throw is gonna fix the fact that from the very first move, you screwed up the entire sequence. You screwed up the entire relationship between the pelvis, between the torso, and you really had no option but to just fall down the mound and extend. There's really nothing you can do to get the arm back in plane, get the trunk back in plane, and have a clean end of the throw. So in some cases, we actually need to take a forwards chaining approach. We need to work from the start of the throw down the chain. In other cases, we need to work a backwards chaining approach, start at the end of the throw and work back. And sometimes we actually need to work on both sides towards the middle. So when I hear backwards chaining, there's a lot of validity there. I used to think that was the only or best way to do it, but I've since learned that if the issue is happening at the start, we do need to address the start of the throw to even have a chance to transfer some of those downstream drills further into the throw. Another issue is that very rarely do I see guys actually use radar feedback to evaluate objectively what they're doing in their drill work. Again, we're taking away variables in our drill work. We're trying to isolate or chunk some part of the delivery, be able to work on it and then integrate it back into the entire throw and then blend that to a catch play partner, to a target, back to the mound, and ultimately do that in game. So we're trying to simplify things and remove variables from this standpoint to be able to kind of troubleshoot and trial and error our delivery. So let's say we're not quite sure, because you're never 100% sure if what you're doing is gonna help. But let's say for the sake of argument, we're working on back foot position. We're gonna see, hey, does turning my back foot in 15 degrees help? Well, we can just do that and see how it feels. Okay, that's some subjective data. Maybe that's helpful. We can have our coach watch us and maybe they say, hey, that looks better. Okay, that's also subjective. That might give us some clues, but let's actually gather some objective feedback. Now, you have to be a little bit careful with radar feedback because if you use it every single day, every single throw, what happens? Guys will throw, immediately look back at the radar gun, and they start to become over-reliant on that instant feedback. That being said, if you never use radar feedback, you're missing out on this potential for really an accelerated learning curve. So this is extremely helpful to use from a split testing standpoint. If we know, hey, I'm pretty sure that adding a coil to my leg lift should help, it feels pretty good, but I normally throw like this, then what you can do is a blind split test. You'd set up your pocket radar, your video camera, you'd have your coach watching, and you might throw 5 to 8, you know, the original way, 5 to 8 with the coil, and you're trying to just keep the same intensity level. Don't look at the numbers, don't look at the radar readings until after. Afterwards, you kind of test this as essentially a mini self-experiment. You're like the lab rat, you're just running a little pilot test, 5 to 8, 5 to 8. Was there any difference? Was the perceived effort the same? Yes. Hey, I threw 2 miles an hour harder with that slight coil. Great. That's probably an indicator we should take that to our catch play, take that to our bullpen, and continue working our way through that change. If not, hey, maybe we scrap that. We don't necessarily have to continue to push forward with that change. So using radar feedback, not just on max effort, plyo velo days or for intensity, but using it on these like moderate effort days to gather information, it can really accelerate the learning curve. The next issue that I commonly see is that guys don't have any process or rationale for the different ball weights that they use. They just think that magically by varying up ball weights or following some set cookie cutter program, it's just gonna work. And they just trust the process, trust the drills, trust the ball weights, but there's not really like an understanding of what's actually happening from a biomechanical standpoint, or why you might emphasize more heavy ball stuff with one athlete, or more 5 ounce or more 4 3-ounce stuff with a different athlete. And so just a couple things to be aware of. Again, we talked about when the ball weights get excessively heavy, that you start to see kind of guarding, tensing, and the arm doesn't just like relax to allow it to whip into bar release. So we've covered what happens when you start going 2 and 4 pound balls in a lot of cases, but there still are benefits to going a little bit heavier than a regular 5 ounce baseball. And when I say a little bit heavier, I'm talking about 6 ounce, 7 ounce, all the way up to about a pound, where you typically don't see too many compensations up to about at 6 to 16 ounce range. And the reason that the heavy balls can be really valuable is because they give you more feedback about where your arm is in space. If you can imagine throwing like a wiffle ball, there's like no weight there. You can throw a wiffle ball from here, you can throw a wiffle ball, all sorts of crazy arm timing, inefficient patterns. If I had to go do a deadlift with a broomstick, I could do it. Terrible form there, rounding my back, like bringing it way away from my center of mass. But if you put 4 or 5 on the bar, you kind of have to get neutral spinal position, biomechanically efficient positions to actually get the weight up. So it's kind of the same thing as you go a little bit heavier with the ball weight. It really exaggerates and accentuates the feel of being out of time, out of plane. And so if you take a heavier ball, even like a 1 pound ball, and your arm is down at landing, it's not in plane, it's not up. And so you can consider this from a scientific standpoint, you get more proprioceptive feedback, more information from your brain about where your arm actually is in space. The reason this matters is that the heavy ball work, to keep it simple, is helpful from a patterning standpoint. If we're trying to get the arm to go from being super late at landing or maybe super low at landing to more in line with our shoulders and more on time, again, slightly heavier balls will allow us to feel that a little bit better. The lighter balls, you're not going to be able to feel what your arm is doing behind your body. So that's really where the heavy balls shine. They're not as good for like teaching your arm to be fast and quick from flip up into ball release. Because again, it's heavier load, it's going to be a slower contraction. That's where the light balls really shine. The light balls are not going to give you much feedback about where your arm is in space. So they're not going to be as helpful from a patterning standpoint, from getting your arm up on time in plane. But once you've gotten some of the patterning benefits from some of the heavy ball work, the lighter balls can really help you learn to relax the arm and then also to be able to close the gap aggressively. So if you really want to simplify it, you can think about like arm speed, lighter balls, patterning and arm strength, or the force side, heavy balls. And so again, you're going to be in this bandwidth from about 3 ounce balls, 3.5 ounce balls, all the way up to 16 ounce. You start getting into the 2 ounce range, you start getting into the 2 pound range, and you start to get so far away from the actual weight of a baseball that in my opinion, it starts to be a little bit less productive. But that's generally what you'll see. The other component with the slightly heavier balls is because they're heavier, it can also help with guys that have a tendency to drag the arm in insufficient elbow extension. So for guys that are out here at landing, because that ball is a little bit heavier, it has a tendency to subconsciously bring that ball in closer to that center of rotation. So guys that drag the arm, you put a 1 pound ball in their hand, maybe you get them to feel kind of lasso throws, it brings the ball in closer to the ear and can start to influence some of those different timing mechanisms in the arm without an athlete having to consciously think about it. So that's just some different ways to think about ball weight usages. Some guys, we don't have to throw light balls at all, and some guys, it's just heavy ball patterning stuff. Other guys, we're not really worried about the path, the patterning. It's more about getting a quicker arm that can relax better and fire from flip up into ball release. And so they're gonna have a lot more of that 5 ounce, 4 ounce, 3 ounce stuff. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about ball weights and how you can customize that a little bit more based on your specific issues. The final mistake that we see repeatedly is a little bit challenging for some guys to feel or be aware of, but it becomes apparent when you look at video or you start to see what happens when they take their plyos into catch play. And that is they're overly tight with their grip on the plyo. So again, different plyo brands, they're all very similar, but because they're squishy, what some guys do is they have a tendency to really like white knuckle these balls, especially as they go into layback and ball release, they're like really tensing it. The issue is that once they get into catch play, they have a tendency to start cutting those balls. They're holding on to them a little bit longer. They're kind of yanking the ball a little bit in front of them. A lot of times they're yanking the ball further down on the plyo wall as well, just because they're white knuckling it, they're holding on to it a little bit too long. So they go into catch play, and those first 10, 20 throws, they're cutting it, they're yanking it, they're spiking the ball. And so it ends up just not being a great fit to throw this soft plyo balls for a certain percentage of athletes. I couldn't tell you if that's 10% or 25%, but there's a substantial percentage of guys that just don't do well with the soft, squishy balls because they have a hard time just relaxing in the hand. And so for these guys, again, going back to the hard leather baseballs, whether it's 5 ounce or whether you're gonna bias more 3, 4, 6, 7, 9 ounce balls, those hard leather baseballs tend to solve that pretty quickly. And there's no reason you have to use a squishy plyo ball. It's helpful if you're throwing into a hard wall because it doesn't ricochet. That's really the only benefit. But if you're throwing into a net, I don't see a huge advantage to using plyo balls over a hard leather baseball. So that's kind of, as long as you have a net, I prefer the hard leather baseballs in most circumstances. So just be aware that that can be another issue that you might see. So hopefully you guys have seen that there's a lot more nuance when it comes to constructing an individualized plyo routine than you might have kind of given it credit for. It's not just about everybody lining up and doing some cookie cutter program. It's really about understanding the nuances of how their body moves, how it should move, how their movement assessment ties into different mechanical flaws, what type of mover they are, and then whether we should be attacking this from a backwards chaining, forwards chaining standpoint, ball weights, cues, positions. We have hundreds of different combinations of drills that we'll give guys. And so it's really about how do we understand how to transfer this both to the mound, factoring in their off-speed pitches, factoring in their entire arsenal, factoring in their lifting. All these different variables come into play when it comes to constructing an off-season and in-season training protocol. So hopefully you got value out of this video. If you guys are struggling in your own career, have questions, want help setting up your own routine, reach out to us. We'll be happy to help, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.